Hello, everyone. Welcome to Leading in a New Reality. I'm Elizabeth Fitzsimons, Vice President of Leadership and Engagement at LEAD San Diego, an affiliate of the San Diego Regional Chamber of Commerce. At LEAD San Diego, it's our mission to connect and educate and empower leaders for positive change. And we do that a number of ways through professional and leadership development, board matching, and partnering with local nonprofits on projects that benefit the community. For information on our programs for every stage of your career, please visit sdchamber.com/lead. This webinar is produced in partnership with Jones, a company whose mission is to develop leaders and human systems that counter oppression through diversity, inclusion, and organizational effectiveness. This webinar is meant to help you understand what's happening in our ever-changing world and inspire you and empower you as leaders of teams and leaders of families. We are recording this webinar, and it is also being live streamed by our friends at ABC 10 News. Thank you, 10 News. We'll take questions from our viewers, so please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll take questions from Facebook too. Just drop a question in the comment and we'll pick it up. My colleague and program manager, Kim Nguyen, is at the controls, and she'll be looking for your questions and comments. Today's topic is careers and recruiting after this year that we've had, right? With a global pandemic and protests around the country, and just coming off of a very, very divisive election. 2020 has been a year of huge change. It forced us all to really think quickly and adapt. And for many of us, it called us to reflect on our values and what we want to do professionally and personally. So we're going to dive into what has the impact been on our careers and long-term plans. How have organizations changed and who they hire? Are new skill sets in demand? Is there now a more thoughtful approach to diversity and inclusion? And what about our young people? And what are they thinking about? And are they rethinking their plans and the way that they envision their lives and careers? We have three wonderful experts here to join us today to explore these questions, and it's my pleasure to introduce them to you now. Trevor Blair has 20 years of experience in executive search, recruiting, and workforce development. He started his career with Manpower, a global provider of recruiting and HR solutions, and now leads Blair Search Partners, which he founded in 2016. Trevor and his team specialize in search engagements for nonprofit and public sector clients. The company manages approximately 40 search engagements a year, 2/3 of which are at the executive and director level for clients that you'll recognize: Rady Children's Hospital Foundation, the San Diego Foundation, and the San Diego Symphony. Trevor's community engagement is centered on education and employment issues, and he serves on committees and boards for several organizations, including LEAD San Diego, 0800, the Barrio Logan College Institute, San Diego Rotary, San Diego Grantmakers, and Mission Driven Finance. I should say Catalyst now. Grantmakers just had a rebrand. Trevor is also a 2007 and 2017 graduate of LEAD's Impact and Influence programs. Welcome, Trevor Blair. You're on mute, Trevor.
I guess the spacebar function isn't working right now. I said, thanks very much, Elizabeth. Pleasure to be here.
Great to have you, Trevor. Tamara Craver is President and Chief Executive Officer of Reality Changers, an organization that prepares youth to become first-generation college graduates and agents of change in their communities. I love that. Mm-hmm. Tamara has more than 20 years of experience in nonprofit management, executive leadership, and youth development. She's a passionate advocate for first-generation college students and equitable access and exposure for life-changing opportunities for youth. Before coming to Reality Changers, Tamara was director of the Posse Foundation in Los Angeles. And the Posse Foundation, what they do is identify, recruit, and train individuals who have extraordinary leadership potential. Posse scholars receive full tuition leadership scholarships from Posse's partner colleges and universities. Tamara is a 2020 graduate of Lead's Influence Program for C-level executives. Welcome, Tamara Craver.
Thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
We're glad to have you, Tamara. Azadeh Davari is a certified executive leadership coach with more than 10 years of experience in designing and delivering personal and organizational leadership development programs with a deep reflective approach to raise consciousness. Dr. Davari earned her PhD in leadership studies with a focus on organizational leadership and consulting from University of San Diego. She is an adjunct faculty member at the Center for Creative Leadership, where she facilitates solutions to empower managers and their teams. And she is also an adjunct professor at Pepperdine University Graduate School of Education and Psychology, as well as faculty and coach at Rise San Diego Urban Leadership Program. Dr. Davari has led hundreds of workshops around the world for professionals in human resources, science, technology, startups, and many other fields. Welcome, Azadeh Davari.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. Thank you all for being with us today. We're going to start with just a centering on the moment that we're in. 9 months into a pandemic, increased awareness around systemic racism and social injustices, an incredibly divisive election, as we mentioned. I'd like each of you to describe this year from the space that you're in, from the space you inhabit. What stands out for you? And if we could start with you, Azadeh, that would be wonderful.
Sure. Good afternoon to all our viewers and listeners. I'm happy to be here, and what a question and what a year, 2020. We can all agree that it has not been easy. And in my experience, 2020 has been this open and intense invitation for all of us human beings to somehow operate from a different level of consciousness. The more I reflect on it, as you know, like we all try to reflect a little bit more as we get to month of December, the more I reflect on it, I see that we had to face problems that we normally don't face. We don't know quick fixes to one answer. There's no easy solution to whatever happened, all the way from killing of Black men and women on the streets, in their homes, the continued racism, not only in this country, but all over the world. I would say all different forms of social injustice that we have to face, not to mention the environmental impacts that we all have. And we've seen fires right here at home in San Diego and all over. And then I think the boldest problem that we had to face was this pandemic. And the way I see it is, this is for the absolutely first time that no matter what class, what race, how much money you make, no matter what border, which country you live, how many languages you speak, you are afraid of this pandemic. You have to survive. And everybody, you can see all different countries, everybody is looking for one simple solution to one problem that we are all facing with. So again, I think this is a call for all of us to raise our own awareness, to see what is the level of consciousness we are operating from at this moment, and how we can just step up our own game just a little bit, compare yourself with yourself and see what else you can do. And recently I've been grappling with the whole idea of how I personally can move from self-care to community care and practice some of that. And I know this is only your first question, and I don't want to go along for so long, but I just want to open with the intention, with open heart and open mind for all of us, because you know, and a lot of our viewers know that I'm also part of the Iranian American community in San Diego. And I was reminded this morning of this poem by Azadeh, the Persian poet, which has been written for years at the UN headquarters in New York and in Geneva. And the poem is called Human Being. And it says, human beings are members of a whole in creation of one essence and soul. If one member is afflicted with pain, other members uneasy will remain. If you have no sympathy for human pain, the name of human you cannot retain. So in this opening, I'm conscious and I'm aware of being just one small part of a whole system. And I think in my experience, I'm looking more towards unity and oneness for all of us as we welcome 2021. And hopefully the situations at the workforce and at home would be much better.
Thank you, Azadeh. That was an incredible grounding and centering. And I really love the idea of reflecting how have I changed this year? How am I different than how I was a year ago at this point? That could be pretty powerful. Trevor, from your perspective, what stands out for you for 2020?
Sure. Yeah. And I love that closing. That's going to be hard to follow that one. What I am most struck with in reflecting on 2020 is that as bad as things are, and it has been awful, it hasn't been worse. If you had told me that 9 months ago we would not be yet done with the coronavirus back in March, I would have expected by now the economy would have completely shut down. And that hasn't happened. While certain sectors have been completely decimated, on the whole, the economy has shown a remarkable amount of resiliency, in my opinion. And while almost every sector is down, there are a lot of opportunities still out there. And that's something that I continue to be amazed with every day, that is as bad as the carnage is, as bad as the headlines are, as divisive as the issues have been, as just crazy as, particularly the past 2 months have been, there is still hiring going on. There are still opportunities out there. There are still organizations that are actually raising quite a bit of money and are thriving and are innovative, and good stuff is still happening. I think it's very hard to keep all of that in perspective, especially if you have been furloughed, if you have been laid off, if you have you feel your career is kind of sputtering because of the economic conditions. Again, overall, things are still happening. I'm also, to break that down a little bit farther, while there are still opportunities out there, I'm also struck by kind of this bifurcated market we have. And I'm talking about the job market opportunities out there, that senior level positions by and large tend to have kind of hung on. And it really is mid-level and more entry-level positions that have been hit the hardest. And, my heart goes out to people who were kind of just getting a toehold in the job market or kind of rapidly climbing up the ladder. I think they have faced the biggest setbacks. When I look at, our search data from March to present, where the market has slowed down is in mid-level positions, entry-level and mid-level positions. While most of our work is still at the C-level and more senior level positions, we work with organizations at all different levels. We provide support level roles like program officers, executive assistants, and that activity has by and large shut down. It's those more senior level roles that organizations can't live without, right? I mean, you obviously can't go too long without a CEO. You can't go too long without a chief development officer. So those searches are still moving forward. It's the less senior level opportunities that have been hit the hardest. So to sum it up, I'm really struck by how relatively well the economy has done, all things considered, but I'm also struck by that kind of bifurcation of the job market.
Thank you, Trevor. Something that you said that really resonated with me, that the good things that are happening despite everything this year. And we have seen so much innovation and people just really stepping up and doing incredible things. So I think that there's some, as you said, some really good things happening this year that we can take forward into 2021. Tamara, what's your view?
Well, this has been a year of uncertainty. and definitely a year of especially students questioning status quo. And no longer, this is just the way business has been done. This is what we've always done. And I think all of the things that have happened that led into the pandemic and around that same time really has charged students with, why do we have to do it this way? Why am I thinking this way? And so it's challenging us as organizations to think about things a little bit different and what the students are actually asking for. And I think to both of my colleagues' points here is that there's been so much humanity that I've seen. The competition, especially in the nonprofit world, we're always competing against each other for the same dollars. This was literally the first year in my professional career, even thinking back to 9/11, that piece went away. It's, what do I have? What do you need? How do we support each other? So those are some things that I've seen this year, is that there's this level of uncertainty about what's the future is to hold, then this level of challenging status quo and like, why do we have to do it this way? And then open arm and open hearts to working together in a different way. So it's been a really interesting ebb and flow and mix of emotions over this year, as we can all attest to, that we've been on this emotional roller coaster. But I think the light at the end of the tunnel for me is that from all of this, I get that there's hope that we can change some things and do business a little bit different moving forward. And students are really taking charge with that. So I'm actually kind of excited.
Tamara, can you talk a little bit more about what you're going to take into 2020 as a 2021 as a CEO?
Oh my goodness.
What lessons, what new skill sets, what are you taking forward?
Yes. So one of the things that we have done a lot with our students is we had to go virtual within 24 hours, as most people did, working with our students to make sure that we were supplementing the education that they were receiving during the gap when the pandemic first happened and the shutdown happened. One of the things that we encouraged our students was to look at enrolling in college courses to get a certification, a skill set. If, you know, I always pick Trevor because he always said, if you don't come out of this pandemic with a skill in your hand, you've missed an opportunity. And so we've literally infused that to our students. So what we're seeing is that students are tackling things a little differently. They're looking at how to enhance their education, how to gain a skill set. I think definitely we are much more of a going into technology where that's not something we focused a lot on, but we're finding that with this new way of virtual living and Zoom calls, we are having more participation from our students, our family, from volunteers. For example, we had a student celebration last night, speech tournament. We had 90 people dial into the virtual, where normally we'd have up to maybe 10 volunteers show up that night. So we're already seeing a difference in how people are interacting with us, because now they can see us, they can get to us. And I think it's going to also be able to expand our reach to more students as we really look at this year as a year for rebuilding and realigning things. Is how can we take this opportunity and spread the word a little bit more and deepen our roots here in the San Diego backyard to serve more students. So again, there's these lights at the end of the tunnel that there may have been some horrible things that have come out of this, but it's also been some great opportunities to move forward as an organization to support our students in different ways.
Azadeh, how does that sound how does that match up with what you see in the executives that you coach?
Sure. My short answer are two words: adaptation and compassion. And I think with a lot of community leaders, also organizational leaders, we keep talking about adaptive leadership, how we can think outside the box, how we can take on a position that is, we use the metaphor of being on the balcony and watching over the dance floor, because if you keep dancing at the party, there's a good chance that you don't actually know what is going on. But when you lead, it's always good to step back, just to go have a glass of water or any other drinks of your choice. Just stand up right there in the balcony and look what is going on. Listen to the music, listen to what is going on, the dynamics and all that. And then only if you listen more carefully and you see what is going on out there, you can come up with the best idea. So I think with the whole 2020, we have to listen more carefully to what's going on out there, but also what is going on in here. because I think you cannot, no matter what kind of position you take, and it could be the highest position on earth, and until the time that you take the opportunity to do the inner work, you cannot be successful being the best CEO or executive or even entry-level job, right? So this has always been my intention, but I think this year with more care, I would pay attention to this with the work I do with leaders. And I think if leaders want to practice one thing, is compassion, compassion, compassion. And this pandemic and everything else that happened this year just keep reminding us we could have more compassion. And right before we began, we were just chatting for 2 minutes, and Elizabeth mentioned, I love it because I can be messy and it's okay. Because it's okay. You can't be perfect all the time. Everything cannot be perfect all the time. And with that, I think we should look into all different feelings that we have. There's a sense of grief for a lot of us, a lot of community members who lost somebody, who lost a position. I know I am one of the most positive people that I know, but I feel like to pay attention to what is positive, butterflies and rainbows, but also challenges that we have to see, because if we don't get to see them, there's no way we could enjoy the beauty of butterflies and rainbows. So I would say there's so much trauma out there in society. There's pain, there's grief, there's, as Tamara said, uncertainty, ambiguity. We don't know. We don't have enough information to know what's going to happen next. And acknowledging all those emotions, feelings, how you feel isolation, loneliness, multitasking, the loose boundary that all of us experience, and it's more intense for most women out there in the workforce. So be more compassionate towards yourself and towards your employee, and adapt. Now we know that we don't have to show up 9 to 5 every day, and there are other ways of running things. So these are the longest version of that 2 words. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you. I love that. And yes, I do think we were talking before the webinar started about just how this year has created a lot more forgiveness, of being messy, and things happen, and, we're all in this together. It's that shared humanity that you were talking about earlier, Azadeh, and what you mentioned as well, Tamara. And I love the idea of getting up on that balcony, which I think is very difficult as a leader when you're triaging in a year like this to be disciplined about getting back on that balcony and thinking strategically. Trevor, what have you noticed in the executives that you're placing?
I would say that those folks who are making successful transitions and those folks who are tending to get the offers are the ones who display a few key characteristics that are always important. I mean, nothing's going to be a real shocker what I'm about to say. I mean, these things are always good to have no matter what's going on in the wider economy. But I think these are really more now at the fore of what recruiters and interviewers are looking for. And they are things like, and I'm going to speak to the executive level, but it holds at just about all levels within an organization. But right near the top is going to be that calm demeanor, right? Especially for a leadership position. They're going to want to see someone who has come through the last 9 months and still has their head on their shoulders, that has shown an ability to handle the stress, to keep calm, especially now more than ever. Boards and organizations are going to be looking for someone who can be that steady hand on the tiller to keep things going through the rest of the year and then help the organization really power out in 2021. So that cool, calm, collected demeanor, that confidence is very important. And with that, I would also pair optimism, right? Everybody wants to work with people who bring them up, right? We want to have a team that when we get off that Zoom call or hang up the phone, or remember when we used to do face-to-face meetings, when we walk out of that meeting, we feel excited, right? There a little bit of their energy rubbed off on us, right? those are the sorts of people now more than ever that organizations are looking for, because there is so much doom and gloom out there right now. So that positivity, there's really a premium on that energy and that optimism. And, you know, the other thing is resilience, right? Someone who has shown that they have been able to take what's been thrown at them over the last 9 months and in some way, shape, or form make lemonade. And someone who can say, you know what, even in the worst adversity, I can find some opportunity, and here's how I'm going to use it to my advantage. So we may touch on this a little bit later in the discussion, but one of the biggest things I would share with people is, if you are thinking about making a transition, and if you are preparing yourself to go into an interview situation, think long and hard about how have you used the last 9 months, right? Because organizations are going to be looking for people who have kept things moving forward, both professionally and personally. And so those folks who have kind of checked out or treaded water, or sort of thought, you know what, I'm going to hang out on the sidelines and then I'll get back in the game. That's really not going to reflect well, because while this is a really, really unique time, and this has never happened before again, I think what it has shown us is that shocks to society and to the economy will happen again. It's been a while since we've had one of this magnitude, but we had the Great Recession, we had 9/11. I mean, we had things like the year 1968 and whatnot, and you can point to all these different disruptions. I think those disruptions are happening with greater frequency. And so something like this will happen again at some point in time. And so you need to demonstrate that you're the kind of person who can handle these sorts of shocks and actually spin them to your advantage.
Trevor, can you tell us a little bit more about the market out there right now for leaders in search of a new position, an executive position, and talk to us about that timing, about, you know, worrying about, is now the right time? Should I wait until all of this is over? Talk to us about that, please.
Now. Do not take your foot off the gas. Conventional wisdom might be, look, it's a bad time out there. Organizations are shedding staff. People are, under a lot of stress. I don't want to bother people with networking and being seen as self-promoting, et cetera, et cetera. So again, I'm going to hang out on the sidelines. I'm going to wait this out until, maybe early 2021, maybe even over the summer, before I really start to put myself out there and think about a transition. And that is the complete opposite of what you want to do for a number of reasons. Firstly, that's what your competition is doing, right? And this is all a numbers game. It's how many people are you competing against for each of those opportunities. And you have to assume that for every position you're applying for, there's probably several hundred other people who are in the mix in some way, shape, or form, either as active candidates or as passive candidates. So how do you get ahead of all of those folks? And that's by leaning into your job search and putting in more effort even than you would have before, because like we said, there are still opportunities out there. Your competition is actually taking their foot off the gas because they think it's a bad time to be looking for a new position. And thirdly, the people that you want to connect with, the decision makers, whether they are actually recruiters or hiring managers or board members, or people who have some sort of influence over hiring decisions within organizations, those people that you want to network with are more accessible to you now than they ever will be. Because just like you, they are stuck at home, right? They are probably not going into the office, or if they are, not as much. They are definitely not traveling. They are not in staff meetings. They are not going to fundraisers. They are stuck on the phone and stuck in front of their computer, which means you can get to them now better than you ever will be able to, better than you ever could in the past, and a lot better than you will be in the spring and the summer. Because once we're back to normal, those folks are going to be so busy. They're going to just be so hard to track down. So reach out, do your networking. You will be surprised, I guarantee you, how people will be willing to sit down with you virtually, have that virtual coffee, have a virtual happy hour, even just 20, 30 minutes, and give you a slice of time and give you a little bit of their input and wisdom and give you an opportunity to get to know them, and vice versa. Because it will be a long time before this opportunity comes again. So get in front of these people while you can.
We hope it will be a long time until this happens, right? Thank you, Trevor. So we're going to see where our viewers are. We're going to launch a poll. Kim is going to launch a poll, and I'm going to read the poll so our viewers on Facebook and the website can see what our questions are, and they can drop their answers in the comments. Question 1 is, the pandemic and current state of our country inspired me to find a new career path. Yes, no, or indifferent. Number 2 question is, I held off on my career change / job search due to the pandemic. Straight to Trevor's point. Yes, no, or doesn't apply. If you could all answer, and we will bring those results to you in a moment. And as we wait for those results, maybe we can talk a little bit more what Trevor was saying, what organizations are looking for. We know that this year has brought increased awareness of the need for gender balance and diverse and inclusive teams, right? And so I'd love to know from Trevor and what you're seeing, Azadeh, are organizations putting that awareness into practice? Are they really making those intentional hires now? What are you observing? Azadeh, what's happening with the organizations that you consult with?
From what I see, there's more demand on doing diversity, inclusion, equity work, and that is great. From a perspective of somebody who's done this kind of work for a couple of years now, I think it is great only if it's not a matter of checking another box. Just for the sake of saying, oh, we've done this training for 2 hours. That doesn't count. It only counts if people from different levels of your organization get involved, get engaged, get messy in the work, and realize what are some of the real needs of the organization. And again, change is the only constant factor. Everything is changing. So we have to meet this moment. We have to meet ourselves in this moment, because I'm not the same person as I was 6 months ago. And that requires extra work, extra effort in what you're putting out there, how you represent yourself, how you represent your company. So I think getting involved more in this kind of work is great. If you're in an organization that you don't see new movement or new invitations, raise that issue up, demand some of this kind of work, be the change you want to see. And unfortunately for gender equality, I mean, we see the number of rising, but with the pandemic, I've been working with a lot of women leaders, with a lot of women in higher position, and their life is not easy. They have to deal with different things. Sometimes they are homeschooling with 2, 3 kids at home, and the boundary around them is looser than it used to be. So in 1 minute they have to be on Zoom calls, they have to make important decisions. The other minute they have to turn off the camera and be the teacher or be with the teacher online. So I'm just recognizing that, and I salute all women out there, professional women, because it's been tough, but you're strong and you're persistent and you will do it. But also the invitation of for you at home and at your organization, just to look after other people that you see around you, so that we could all take at least one step more towards equity if we can. And that's how we can change the culture and create a new one.
Thank you, Azadeh. Trevor, are you seeing your clients taking a little bit more intentional approach to who they're bringing in for, or who they're seeking and who they're adding to their teams?
It's definitely top of mind and more part of the dialogue. And I'm going to speak very broadly here. We do some work with for-profit entities as well. So my comments are not directed towards the nonprofit sector or public agencies or corporations. This is more globally. I'm talking about hiring for any organization. And there's a big difference between, publicly stating and even in the language you're using around your job postings and your hiring, your interview questions and all your hiring practices about, we say we are really doubling down on diversity. We really want to make sure that we reflect the community that we serve, et cetera, et cetera. And then actually changing your hiring practices to deliver that outcome. And I think a lot of organizations have not made that leap yet. They're talking about diversity. They're talking about the need to bring new voices, new faces into their organization, but they're still hiring to the old criteria with the old job descriptions and expecting new outcomes, right? And it's like Einstein's theory of insanity, right? Do the same thing over and over and expect a different result. If organizations are serious about diversifying their workforce and bringing in people of color, bringing in people of different generations into roles that have maybe typically been held by someone of a prior generation, right? There's going to be an element of risk involved there. And I get it. These are very scary times and organizations may be even more risk averse than they normally will. But you have to ask yourself, how serious am I about diversity? Am I willing to take some risks and make some changes to the way I operate internally, particularly for my hiring practices, to make that happen? If you do it, the payoff will be huge and you will get there, but mentally, it's a hard shift for some organizations to make. And I think to make it less scary, if you really ask yourself, if I look at this position and I've got these top 5 criteria, which criteria can actually be learned on the job or learned through a course or learned through some kind of training, and which criteria are inherent in the individual, right? And diversity isn't just about what you look like. In my opinion, diversity all stems from our own individual lived experience. And it's that lived experience that affects who we are and our thought processes and the way we see the world, right? And so if you want someone who brings particularly lived experience from particular communities, then that's what you need to hire for. You need to be clear to yourself, these are the things that I cannot train for. And these are the things that I can train for. And the things that you can train for need to be numbers 3, 4, and 5 on your list. And the inherent lived experience things that are intrinsic to the individual, those need to be number 1 and number 2 on your hiring criteria.
Thank you, Trevor. Yeah, it's one thing to make a statement and then another thing to actually put it into practice, right? And change the way that you've been doing things for many, many years. Tamara, in your network of CEOs and executives, what are you noticing in how they're approaching their hiring and how they're building and nurturing their teams?
I think directly to your point, we can't just talk the talk anymore. We actually have to walk it. And just having a statement somewhere that, we believe in diversity, equity, inclusion is no longer enough. We have to be able to put that to action and show it. And I think that the intentionality of it in terms of looking at the diversity of thought, the diversity of lived experiences, as Trevor said, is so very important. And even if you look at it as taking the risk factor out of it, but challenging yourself to not be so stuck with, well, we always recruited from this particular school, we always recruited for this GPA, and looking at it from a different lens of experience versus the check mark pieces, I think, are going to be a big factor for us. And as we've all been talking, there's also people don't want to be seen as like, well, I only hired this person because of XYZ versus this was the right candidate. But I think broadening the pool of the right candidates is going to be what's most important. And we can't just in a silo, this is the only place we look for people. So spreading the word amongst our communities, our networks, professional and personal, I think is going to be a huge shift for us. And talking to people, calling up Azadeh and say, hey, I see this person on LinkedIn. Can you tell me about them? There's a lot more of that now, I think, happening than in the past, that you're really based on other people's experiences with those folks. So make sure your LinkedIn profiles are up to date and that you're leaving great positive relationships with people, because it's those relationships, I think, that are going to move the needle more so than a person just check the box for any particular role. And even for us as a nonprofit, I feel like we do a really great job of hiring diversity, equity, inclusion, and things like that. But our students actually asked us to have a statement. They wanted to be able to pinpoint and show people that we actually had a statement. And I just said, we have to make sure that if we're going to have a statement that, you know, we're not talking about it. We have to talk about it and then be about it. And I think that's the commitment I've made to my students, is that we're not going to just make some public statement without putting the action behind it. And so my team is up for the challenge. And I think a lot of organizations are doing the exact same thing, is figuring out ways to actually put the words into practice.
This is a great point, Tamara. I love that. It reminds me of something that Azadeh said at an event a couple of years ago about, you know, getting people to the table. It's not enough to just put an invitation out and hope that the people that you have in mind show up, right? Yeah. You have to go to them and invite them and bring them in, right? Exactly. So Kim tells me that we have the results from the poll. If we could take a look at that. Oh my goodness, that's pretty cool. The 51% are thinking about a new path. And Trevor, you should be happy they are not holding off on their job search. That is good. All right, that's really interesting. Let's talk just a little bit about, before we go to questions from our audience, and we have a few lined up. Tamara, you talked about, you know, what you've noticed in the young people that you work with. What do you see as being the long-term impacts of this time on them and what they are going to be doing moving forward? What do you see for them in the future?
Well, I think going back to Azadeh's point, you know, compassion is going to be very important. There are people walking around with a lot of heavy trauma right now. So simple compassion and empathy to people. I would just say, please make sure you exhibit that to people, because some people out here are not okay, and just checking in with people. But I think that there's a tremendous amount of anxiety that the students are experiencing right now, as you know, we're going back to school on this date, we're going back to school on this date, and that just keeps getting pushed out for them. And then just giving up a lot of their high school life, things that just make a person well-rounded. They're giving up all of those things, and they're at home and they're isolated. A lot of students are afraid of what's going to happen for them as they get prepared for college. Many people have heard that the grades this semester were pretty bad. So students are having a hard time with adjusting to the online learning piece. So we are really talking to our students intentionally about additional ways to support them, because I don't think anyone was prepared for this onslaught of online learning. I think there's a difference between people that can say, I can do an online master's program, and others are like, no, I have to go in class. These students don't have that choice right now. They're also babysitting. Some of them are now working part-time jobs to support their families and having to make some decisions about what college is going to look like for them in the future. So there's a lot of fear and anxiety amongst our student population of what's next for them. But I think that they are still working hard. They're trying their best to make the best of the situation, like attending those speech tournaments that we did last night, finding cooking classes. We had a book club for a little while just to find additional ways to keep them engaged. But the fear is real for them right now. And I think not knowing if they're going to have a school year this year is probably very challenging for them. And then being in this new role of being at home with younger siblings, having to learn how to study with kids in the house where they haven't had to do those things before. So there's still a lot of, we don't know. We're trying to hold the line for these students and continue to have opportunities for them that they can select and not feel like they've been siloed. But I think they're afraid. They're afraid of what's going to happen for them. And looking at, do I stay local versus going away to college? That fear with COVID is real. So we're also looking at, will they make decisions to go to a community college versus a four-year institution? And so how do we support them? I mean, these are pivotal times. And I think that organizations like Reality Changers and other nonprofits, we are having to pivot and to make sure that we are addressing the needs of our students. But I think they haven't given up. And I think for me, that's the light again at the end of the tunnel, is that these students have not given up. They haven't quit on themselves and they haven't quit on us. So I think as long as we continue to support them and encourage them and coach them and push them, pull them, and sometimes kick them across that finish line, they're going to get there.
Thank you, Tamara. I have a teenager, so I'm familiar with.
You're familiar with that part, yes.
You put that so well. You know, as you were talking about that, I started to think like, I am so curious to know how the dynamics in the workplace are going to change years from now when these young people enter the workforce, and they have such a different experience from their coming of age than, you know, my generation or millennials. And it's going to be so interesting to see how they relate to each other and with us. And so much is unknown at this point. We're going to shift to a few questions that we have lined up from our viewers. The first one we have touched on, it has to do with Zoom. This is from Dennis Dubard. He's one of our lead board members. He writes, relationships and interactions with clients and colleagues in person are very important. Zoom has become our tool for getting business done. At first, it was an exciting way to reach out. Now it has become a burden, and I fear we are losing the art of in-person interactions. Would welcome your thoughts. Who would like to take this one? This seems like it's up your alley, Trevor.
I agree. Thanks for the question, Dennis, and thanks for being here. I now live my life on Zoom. I've spent already today 5 hours in back-to-back Zooms, and I can't wait to get back to in-person meetings. And I think, originally everyone was super excited because with Zoom, they didn't have to commute, they didn't have to drive, they got all this time back in their life. I think it is the exception now where you find someone who is still feeling excited and liberated by the whole Zoom thing. Because communicating via Zoom is scientifically harder because there are these micro pauses, right? That from the timing perspective, from when someone speaks and then you wait for their reaction, et cetera, where you physically have to work harder to communicate via Zoom. And so I think a lot of people, I know myself in particular, I could meet with another, highly extroverted person via Zoom. When that conversation is over, I still feel a little bit tired versus had we met face to face over coffee or something like that, I walk out of that situation feeling energized. And so I can't wait until we can get back to in-person meetings. From the nonprofit's perspective, I think we will go back to the days of large events and galas and whatnot, because humans are social creatures. And, as much as we've been saying, oh, isn't it great? I don't have to get dressed up and I don't have to drive and yada, yada, yada. On some level, we are all missing interacting with other humans, and just the level of conversation is not the same. And when you think about all the great ideas and connections and relationships that come out of nonprofit events, they're all happening while you're waiting in line at registration, while you're getting a drink, while you're sitting at the table having dinner, right? I mean, it's all the unstructured communication. That's where really a lot of the work gets done, right? Zoom is transactional, right? You come, you exchange information, and we're done. I think the level of innovation and idea sharing and creativity that comes out of a Zoom conversation versus a face-to-face conversation, I think research, when it's available in the next year plus, is going to show that we definitely lost something. So very long answer. The short of it is, I think having a face-to-face meeting is just like riding a bike. And I wouldn't worry too much about it. I think I don't think we will lose our ability to present ourselves well and communicate well face to face. Just don't forget to shower and brush your hair. But I think we're all going to be just fine. And I think everyone's going to be amazed how fast people are ready to be done with Zoom and get back to meeting face to face, even when they have to sit in traffic and drive to be there.
Right. What I really miss is the office, drop-ins. I think that's like where the brilliant ideas happen, or when you're in the kitchen heating up your lunch in the microwave. It's those interactions that I really miss because of those ideas that come out of that. Azadeh or Tamara, do you have anything to add on the Zoom topic? I think we're all a little bit zoomed out.
Well, I would add exactly to that is that even thinking about what our kids are going through right now, this is not normal for them. And the Zoom fatigue is real. As Trevor said, it's going to be interesting to see what comes out of this long term, and the socialization piece, how they're going to, I think they're going to jump back into it. But there's going to be a little bit of an awkward phase again of just kind of jumping back into things. We had a student who told us one day that she had 20 Zoom calls, and I like 5 stresses me out, Trevor. So I understand. So I'm just imagining how that must be for her to like jump off from this teacher to go to this teacher, to go to this after school activity, to go to this social thing. And she said, I had 20 Zoom calls in one day. And, you know, I think that there's a capacity that we have that just, we need that human touch, that humanistic piece to it. And Zoom doesn't quite get it. And the occasional, like we checked in the other day, I love the energy, but, you know, the sustainability of that is going to be tough. But I think we need to get back to human interaction again.
Mhm. Mhm.
Great. Azadeh, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I think if you both covered it perfectly. The only thing I would add is to be intentional of having at least some meaningful, deeper conversation once in a while, because we need to maintain community and who represent that community for us, even when we stay at home. And then be aware of the overperforming, because that would just bring the professional fatigue that is not going to end well. But just be more intentional about it.
Breaking up those transactional meetings that Trevor was talking about with a little bit more connection and heart, right? Rosa Maria Hernandez has a question. She's with Mana de San Diego, and she's an incoming LEAD board member. She asks, how can women of color continue to have advocates when recruitment efforts haven't changed? Other than networking and relationships, how can decision makers advocate to bring them to the table and be seen as viable candidates?
I would say that research, I've read this research at Center for Creative Leadership that says women, especially in technical fields, they are over-mentored and under-sponsored. And the difference between being a mentor and being a sponsor, especially for women of color or any minority groups, is that the mentor want to empower you, right? And would talk to you and would be around when you need the person. But the sponsor is somebody not only empowers you, but you know, like give some credit when it's needed, would name your name somewhere, that if they need somebody, I would just call Elizabeth and say, hey, I know this woman of color. I know you have this position open. I just want to connect the two of you. So naming people in your network, not just networking in the old way of doing that, of just giving cards and saying hi in large events, but being more intentional, how many women of color I named in the rooms that were making decisions about the position. So yeah, being a sponsor, not only a mentor. And I think all of us could do it at any level that we are in.
Yes. Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. When you think this is the long game, right? I mean, it takes years to grow and groom an executive. So all of those women of color who are, making those steps up that ladder year after year, and who are kind of in the midst of this journey, like Azadeh said, is how are you paying it forward too? Because we need to start with those kids who are in school, because that's when you look at the makings of a great executive, it starts that early. And so we really need to be identifying those youth who have shown not only the aptitude, but the desire. And what are all of us, even if you're a fresh college graduate, right? I mean, there are kids in high school who are looking up to you, and there are kids in elementary school who are looking up to them. How do we build this pipeline that starts from day one, where all these generations are being advocates, sponsors, mentors, but I love that term of sponsor. That's super important, because it takes that long, and you will need that many sponsors and that many mentors to go from high school all the way to the C-suite. And so I think the problem is we're only looking at the end, right? We're looking for the final sponsor and the final mentor that's going to take you from director to C-level, right? Yeah. But you're going to need 5 more of those earlier on in your career to get you to that spot faster and more effectively. So I think it's taking the long view and making sure we have a system and a culture that sets women of color up with sponsors and mentors from day one to help them get from one stage to the next stage to the next stage. Because it's not just a one sponsor, one mentor type of thing.
And I would add to that, and it's challenging right now because of just the state of the world that we're living in. But showing up and being seen, be in the spaces where the decision makers are, is important. So, but again, challenging right now. But again, to Trevor's point, this is an unprecedented time to get a hold of those people. Reach out, use LinkedIn to your advantage. Go through the list and see if there's anyone else on that list that that might be able to connect you to those folks. Introduce yourselves, stay in front of them, not just when you want something. I think when something happens, you want a person like Trevor to be like, oh, I remember speaking to her. You want to make sure that your name is lingering in the rooms where decisions are made. So part of that is just showing up. You got to show up, you got to be present, and don't be afraid, which I think is, as a woman of color, historically, we've been shied away from bragging about ourselves. And you have to be able to talk about toot your own horn, be able to blare the trumpets about how great of a staff person you are, a leader that you are, and what do you need to make to the next jump. I think that's something that I would encourage, all women of color, is that stop being afraid to toot your own horn. It's time. It's time.
You got to show up on your own team, right?
Absolutely.
We had a speaker tell our women's group that recently. Show up on your own team.
Show up on your own. Be your own star player.
Well, it's really time for us to. I'm sorry, Azadeh, did you want to say something?
Just to complete what Tamara said brilliantly, is that how we move from being an ally and advocate into being an activist when it comes to diversity and inclusion. Be the activist.
Yes, I love that. It's time for us to close, but before we do, I'm going to ask one more question. Yes, Trevor.
So one more thing, sorry to add to that, and this goes for anyone and everyone, is, as Tamara was saying, be aggressive with your communication, be persistent, be bold, make that ask, but also use different channels of communication, right? Because if you're not reaching somebody and you keep hitting them on LinkedIn again and again and again, Einstein's theory of insanity, right? Yeah. Or if they don't respond to your first email, why would you send them 4 or 5 more emails? We have these things called phones. That, when was the last time you picked up the phone and actually made a phone call, not a text, but a phone call? So you never know what channel an individual will respond better to. Some people are better on text, some people are better on email, but a phone call, because you can't, show up face to face, that is much more of an intensive channel of communication, and it's much more direct and much more personable because they are hearing your voice when you leave that voicemail. And so if you want to cut through the clutter and pick up the phone and give somebody a call, because your competition is not doing that. They're just sitting at home, firing text messages and emails and LinkedIn messages. So go old school and be a little bit more bold and direct in your communication. And I think you'll get results.
Love it. So when we wrap up these webinars, we always ask our guests, because our lead family is very action oriented. We ask our guests for one thing to do when they leave this webinar. What is one thing our guests would have us do? And we're going to start with you, Tamara.
Oh, you give me the hardest one to start with. I would say be intentional about, one, how you walk in this world, how you interact in this world, and intentional about the things that you want. If it is a new job, a new career path, be intentional about it. I think no longer, haphazard approaches to things. You have to be intentional about it, and people will detect and be able to decipher you being genuine and honest about your intentions for that new thing. So be intentional.
Love it. Trevor, is it call someone? That's a very good tip, by the way.
Reacquaint yourself with the telephone. No, it's reflect. And so regardless of, what your journey has been over the past 9 months, some of us may have been quite successful. Some of us may have really taken some hits, but regardless of what your journey has been, take some time today to reflect about, how am I going to use the remaining months of lockdown, and how am I going to be resilient, and how am I going to use this to my advantage so that I come out of this stronger, more, as Tamara said, more intentional, more mindful, but a better person and a better professional.
Love it. This is the time of year for that, right? That reflection. Azadeh.
I want to offer one action item, I would say. And just going back to the quest for unity, I want to ask myself and all of you to find maybe one simple act of community care that we could do in the next week or so. Something could be small or big, but something that is beyond me, beyond you, and it's connected to another human being, because sometimes that goes a long way.
One act of community care.
Community care.
Great. These are all great tasks. I have them written down. I will, as soon as we close this webinar, I'm going to be onto my list. Thank you to our guests, Tamara Craver, Trevor Blair, and Azadeh Davari, for being with us today. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with us and all of your experience, and mostly thank you for your leadership and all that you're doing in our community. We really admire your work, and we're glad that you're here. To all of you who joined us by Zoom and the 10 News live stream, thank you for being here. And on behalf of Lead San Diego, I wish you all well and happy holidays. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Are we logging off?